Hello there, I'm Tony Harris.
And I'm Paul Howarth.
Welcome to the Twilight Turntable,
where we encourage you to revive the lost art of listening.
one late night long player at a time. Hello there, Paul.
Hello, Tone. How are you today?
I'm in very fine fettle. What about yourself?
Fine and dandy, my friend. I'm very much looking forward to the subject matter.
Very good. Well, welcome to everybody to another episode of the Twilight Turntable, so named in honor of my late night listening habits. And as you know, our reason for doing this is that I like to set Paul a little homework every episode, which is to try and introduce him to an album that I probably know fairly well, but he will have had not too much exposure to. And we then have a chat about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paul, would you like to introduce today's homework?
Gladly, yes. It is the debut solo album by Curtis Mayfield, which is
I'm
called
now holding up to camera.
Which is called Curtis. Tone's holding up the album cover, which is Curtis himself dressed in a beautiful off-white suit and looking.
I thought it was. I think you'll find it's yellow because I have a yellow
God!
vinyl.
Can it not be yellow? Can it be gold?
It's yellow. No, well, it's not. It's not. It's not canary yellow. It's very much lemon rather than canary. Don't worry, Paul.
Thank you. And anyway, just while we're on the album title, I may as well introduce the Twilight tidbit, Early Doors, which is debut albums named for the first name of that artist. So Curtis was his debut solo album after leaving the Impressions. So have a little think about that between now and the end of the episode.
I think that's quite a difficult one, actually. I'll tell you what's interesting. Just while we're there, and we've put up the cover. Have you ever seen that album by Lorde called Solar Power?
No.
Have a look at it, because I'm convinced that it entirely borrows the same color palette.
Okay.
I've never seen anything that said it was intended to be a tribute.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, that was an album cover that caused quite a bit of concern in certain territories because she was not wearing any pants.
Oh.
Or no outer pants. She was just in her undercrackers.
All right.
But that blue and yellow is quite an interesting. So if you ever check out Solar Power by Lorde, the cover, I can't help but feel it was inspired by this. But I've never seen any reference to that.
Add it to the Wikipedia page immediately. Source,
please,
Big Toe.
Please.
Come on.
Oh, thank you. So, Paul,
yes,
in a vain search to try and come up with a catchphrase for us, did you like it?
I liked it enormously, Tone. Yes. So as with many of the albums we have considered over the last few weeks, this one I had only ever heard "Move On Up," something that you hear played on the radio quite a lot, and which is a fantastic tune as well. But might even fall into the camp of I've heard it so much that I almost overlook it. But it is a fantastic track in its own right. But that's the only one that I'd heard off this album.
Just move on up to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it.
Everything else I'm listening to afresh and anew. And I've really, really enjoyed it. I mean, if I can just pick up on some of the musical themes first, we'll come to some of the more, I don't know, the
so socially conscious,
heavy social commentary as well. I'm sure we'll cover that. But some things that sort of struck me first listening to this album. Number one, the harp. Oh my goodness, the harp in this, I never thought I'd be saying this, the harp in this is absolutely out of this world, and it gives the whole album a real texture and a feeling. And the harp on tracks like The Other Side of Town or The Makings of You, or towards the end of the track We the People, or Wild and Free, they all have very prominent harp showing.
Now I know.
Actually, while we're talking about instruments and instrumentation, for most of the albums we've looked at, simple to read around this stuff. Go to Wikipedia, see who did what. On this, you just get a whole list of musicians. It just says, these are the musicians. And there's a massive list rather than who did what. I'd be fascinated to understand who did the harp, who played the drums, who did the bass, who did the strings, who did the brass. You know, I don't know. But maybe I haven't dug deep enough. Maybe I should dig more deeply than just Wikipedia.
Weirdly, I just checking on the back of the album sleeve, and it's just a list of musicians.
Yeah.
But the most well-known amongst them actually probably is Phil Upchurch, who I think used to play bass.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. The harps and the strings, but also the counterpoint with some really stabbing horns.
Yeah.
It makes an incredible mix. And also in this is his guitar playing. And you don't tend to think of soul R&B as sort of having axe heroes.
Yeah.
But he really does. And I was watching a clip where a sort of guitar expert was saying his styling of play is quite extraordinary partly because of the strength of what they said was his pinky finger,
right,
in fretting.
Yeah.
In that it was just able to add other notes where other people just simply were not able to.
Yes.
And therefore, you're absolutely right. The sonic landscape of this album is spectacular.
I just think throughout and in every track, you get this stunning musicianship and the arrangements. The whole thing is rich and different, and just the production on it is incredible. I think. Who are the producers? Riley Hampton and Gary Slabo, and I think Mayfield himself was a producer and mixer as well. And I also read that because Curtis Mayfield, possibly because he wasn't sort of classically trained as a musician, he'd start playing and jamming this stuff, and people would go, "That's in a weird key," but anyway, we'll go with it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. What it sounds like to me as a listener to music is out of this world. I mean, genuinely out of this world. And his voice, for Christ's sake, I mean, what a vocalist he is, to the point where, I mean, the first track, "Don't Worry If There's a Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go," which was one of the singles as well, I think.
Yeah, in fact, I think it was the only US single, or the only hit single.
Yeah. And so you get this whole intro piece. You get someone talking. You get a lot of what would these days be called discriminatory language in there, which still feels quite shocking sometimes when you listen to it.
Yeah, it does.
And then you get Curtis's voice come in, and you think, "Oh my, this is like an angel."
Sisters, brothers and the whiteys, blacks and the crackers, police and their backers, they're all political actors. Hurry.
I put down he sounds like a preacher in it, because it comes out of this sort of that opening babel of sound.
Yeah.
And then you get this astonishing heavy fuzz bass.
Yeah.
Playing the sort of the motif that goes throughout the song. And then his shouting which is sort of, sounds like a preacher, and then this sort of sweet voice.
That's it. So
that carries it through.
Yeah, when he starts singing, it's just like, if you'd never heard his voice, and obviously most of us have to an extent. I have to a very small extent, but it just comes in like this angelic presence. And then when you get to a track like The Makings of You, which is the third track, I mean, I like singing along to things. I may not make a great job of it, but you can at least give it a go. Usually, I can't sing along to that. It's impossible. I don't know how he does what he does.
Well, funny you talk about The Makings of You. There's a little mashup on the YouTube, which has the 3 versions of it.
Okay,
which is his vocal, Aretha Franklin's vocal, and Gladys Knight's vocal, and you've got to be quite something to be able to hold up with those two.
Had a little sugar, honeysuckle man, a great big expression of happiness. Boy, you couldn't miss with a dozen roses.
And a little sugar, honeysuckle, and a great big expression of happiness. Boy, you couldn't miss with a dozen roses. Such would astound you.
Aretha Franklin says of him that Curtis was to soul what Bach was to classical, and you're like, wow, that's pretty high praise.
that is deep.
And I kind of get it. I listen to this album and I just go, this is why more people have. I mean, I know it's now starting to be. I mean, it's never been it's not a lost album.
No, indeed.
I think in the world of where things are judged and critiqued, it sort of tends to lose out. It started to sort of pop into some of these top 500s. People have tended to always go to Superfly, which is the follow-up album, and we'll talk a bit about that later, actually.
Okay,
because there are some interesting things around the world of Superfly. I mean, my first introduction to the songs on this album were Move On Up as well. But it was by then it was covered by the Jam.
Oh yeah,
And it was then covered by the Style Council. So Weller loved it so much he did it twice.
Hush now, child, and don't you cry. Your postman understands you by and by. Just move on up towards your destination.
But it also they used to play it in a club that I used to go to. I know it sounds bizarre, listeners, that I ever went to a club, but it was a sort of soul R&B club in Newcastle, and they used to play a lot of things like that. And Move On Up was one of the records. They would play. But really, my first introduction to Curtis Mayfield doesn't come through Curtis Mayfield at all. You may remember a once glam, then became a sort of blue-eyed soul band from the 80s called the Blow Monkeys.
Oh yeah.
And the Blow Monkeys became quite a funky band, but they were very socially aware. They were very much part of Red Wedge. They were very anti-Tory. And they released I think it was their third album, was called She Was Only a Grocer's Daughter, which kind of points to how
amazing
how much it was. And they get Curtis Mayfield, who by the late 80s is not really in vogue with anybody, to come and duet on a song they do called Celebrate, The Day After You, which is a very politically motivated song. And is probably, I think, if you ever listen to it, maybe we can put a clip in. one of the best songs that the Blow Monkeys, I think, ever did, and one of the strongest singles they ever released.
Gonna celebrate the day after you.
It doesn't mean a thing if you can't make it sing. You're funky.
However, they then released it right at the time of the 1987 election.
Right.
So, of course, Celebrate the Day After You was intended to be anti-Thatcher and was promptly banned from all radio stations because it was seen as politically influential. And so the single sort of died. But even when you listen to that, despite it has some slight 80s production ticks on it, it's still a fantastic single, and his voice on that is, again, absolutely sublime. So that's where I first came across. I'd love to be able to sit here and go, oh no, I was listening to Curtis Mayfield when nobody else was. But, I wasn't. I was introduced to him much later through, obviously, fans and admirers of him from the age group that I was listening to. But as a result of that, off I went to discover more. And this was the first place I went.
You mustn't feel bad about that time. I mean, you were only a nipper when this came out anyway.
I was,
And it's fine to discover artists through circuitous routes anyway, isn't it?
But it's nice that is the way that we discover music, actually. So, I like that single so much. I wanted to know more about Curtis Mayfield.
Can we go back to the bass that you rightly identify in that first track, Don't Worry? Which is a tremendous start to the album as well, and it drives you through that first track and leads you into the album. I love that bass line in that, and it reminded me of another track. I don't know if it was directly influential on it, but it certainly reminded me of a track from the 90s, a single by Freak Power, Turn On, Tune In, Cop Out.
Oh, Norman Cook.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize it was Norman Cook until I looked it up again. Well, that's another quiz question, isn't it? How many chart acts has Norman Cook had hit singles with? So he's obviously House Martins, Fatboy Slim,
Pizza Man, Mighty Dub Cats.
Yeah.
And on it goes. Beats International.
Beats International would be, yeah. But I didn't realize this was his acid jazz project or whatever. But the bass line in that, and that was a single that was initially released in 1993 and did okay, but then did much better when it was chosen to feature in a Levi's commercial in 95. It got top 2 or 3, I think. But yeah,
it's a great single.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I was never really into that whole acid jazz scene. It's fine as a single, but that bass line really reminded me of the bass line you find in that first.
And knowing Norman Cook and his extensive record collection and extensive love of soul, almost certainly he will have several copies of Curtis by Curtis Mayfield in his collection. I'm certain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd be amazed if that's not the case. I mean, should we talk a little bit about the social commentary side of this album and the themes of race and politics, etc. Let's just acknowledge, for starters, that we are two middle-aged white fellas talking about this. So that's the context within which. But listen, we're talking about this album, so it makes sense.
I mean, you can't avoid it. I think the interesting thing is to acknowledge the time in which an album like this was coming out, because it was certainly one of the most febrile atmospheres that existed in the United States of America at any stage, probably until, dare I say, the time we're living in now. You'd had 68, the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Vietnam War, the Kent State student protests, where students had been killed. You'd had the rise of George Wallace for the 68 election, and his and racial tensions very, very high.
Yeah.
And we tend to think of America as only as only really having problems in the South. But actually, Martin Luther King had been to visit cities in the North, in Chicago, and realized the problems were getting worse and the tension was growing. And the Impressions, who were Mayfield's previous band, had always kind of acknowledged that there was that they had to bring more depth into their lyrics and work than just boy meets girl, etc. And they'd had the famous People Get Ready, Woman Got Soul, and Keep On Pushing, which had been the theme, I think, at the convention for Obama in 2004. He'd used that because they were from Chicago. He was from Chicago.
Keep on pushing. Keep on pushing. I've got to keep on pushing. I can't stop now. Move up a little higher. Some way or some.
And in fact, Move On Up is, much as it's a brilliant song, sadly was also the theme that backed the Biden and Harris launch campaign.
Oh yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
But that shouldn't in any way, I think, be held responsible for the ultimate result. But the atmosphere in which this album is created is tense.
Yeah.
And what we would call soul acts, not many had really confronted this at all. Possibly only the Temptations, really, with things like Cloud9 and Psychedelic Shack. But even that album, which is another album I like a lot, Temptations, Cloud9, had tended to sort of also leaven it with some quite sort of sweet, more nightclub-based music, rather than deliberately taking on a sort of socially conscious, progressive depth that this album clearly wants to do.
And certainly the first, I mean, I do think we can talk a bit about the difference in tone between side one and side two of this album. Side one, which we've talked about a little bit, is definitely pretty heavy and serious and confronting those issues pretty much head on. And side two, I think, is a little bit lighter in tone, but we can talk about that in a bit. But side one, you get the kind of plea for togetherness, I think, of that first track, Don't Worry. I mean, yes, some of the language used is fairly shocking and deliberately so, but it's all about blacks, whites, Jews. That's all come together, and we got to be in this together if we're going to get through this kind of thing. Yeah. And then elsewhere on a track like We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, which, by the way, is a very poetic, descriptive way of talking about that. We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue is kind of saying, okay, well, you white people are okay. Anyone who's not white, we need to be together as well. And in that they talk directly about this. It's not time for ghettoization and segregation, actually. And he talks about not just black people, but people from all ethnicities being together, which is a different view. It's everyone together, including white people, and it's everyone together who aren't white need to come together to get through this.
We people who are darker than blue. This ain't no time for segregating. I'm talking about brown and yellow too. How yellow, girl, can you tell? You're just the
I mean, it's a rallying call against racism and segregationism.
Yeah,
and I think segregationism is the important thing, possibly less than racism, although he clearly doesn't have a lot of time for the police. Get yourself together, learn to know your sign. Shall we commit our own genocide before you check out your mind? It's like, if we don't sort ourselves out, those two ones you pick out are very important. Because I think that the thing that's important with this album is that he really was believing in diversity. You don't get a sense that he was trying in any. This wasn't a support of the then Black Power thing. He wanted unity, not division. And this is why it's interesting when we come to talk about Superfly, which is the album that comes afterwards. And Superfly is held up as his great album. The critics love Superfly more than Curtis, and I do love Superfly. Don't get me wrong. It's a soundtrack to a film that comes from a genre that still uses again quite a shocking name. It's called blaxploitation.
Yep.
Which were movies that were made preeminently for Black audiences in America, with Black heroes, more often than not criminals, more often than not living, what he would consider quite suspect and gaudy lives. And when he did the soundtrack for Superfly, he was very clear that he wanted the album to come out long before the film.
Darkest of night with the moon shining bright. There's a set going strong, a lot of things going on. The man of the hour has an air of great power. The dudes have envied him for so long. Oh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune.
Because in his mind, the hero wasn't Superfly and the edgy, dodgy world that he lived in. It was, it was those who were trying to work with the system and live good lives and the victims. He didn't like this sort of lionization and putting on a pedestal of people who he felt were actually not helping the way that his community would be viewed.
Yeah, so glamorizing that criminality.
Yeah, because he really had an agenda of unity, and that's what he felt was the only way forward. And I think it's very interesting because virtually all the great soul stars go on and at some stage do a soundtrack to one of these movies. Marvin Gaye does Trouble Man, James Brown does one. Of course, you have Isaac Hayes doing Shaft, which of course everybody knows.
Yeah.
But they are all slightly taking the sort of criminal as hero. Clearly, he did not want that. He is trying to put out a message of hope, progress, and look, we know we're in a bad place, but if we don't get ourselves together, there is no way forward.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fascinating to look at this album in the context of music that spoke to those issues of racial tension and other social commentaries. And you mentioned Marvin Gaye there. Clearly what's going on is often held up as being the kind of the pinnacle of that kind of commentary.
Picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see what's going on. What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? What's going on?
And actually, I realised in looking at this that came out in 1971, whereas this Curtis was out a year before in 1970. So
this starts everything. So you have Sly and the Family Stone with There's a Riot going on. You have Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. You have Gil Scott-Heron, who does things like Pieces of Man, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, but they are far more strident. It's much more adversarial as music. I don't think What's Going On is quite so adversarial, but there is a sort of the opposition to that was really between him and his record company, because Berry Gordy did not want to release an album like that. He did not think that was a good thing for him to do. But he kind of insisted on it. But this is the kickoff point. This is really, I think, the first album that really grips these issues and brings it musically front of mind, rather than it being with Walter Cronkite on the news.
The other track that we haven't spoken about on side one is, spoiler alert, I think it's my favorite track on the album, The Other Side of Town. The
The sun never shines on the other side of town. I mean,
oh
that's
man, it is just beautiful. Well, this again starts with beautiful harp and
yeah.
some thunderous drum, which you'll like this reference, Tone. This reminds me of the start of a track by one of your favorite artists, Embrace. Come on, what's your little tag for Embrace?
Sub Oasis.
Sub Oasis Doommongers, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Sub Oasis Doommongers.
Well,
Yeah.
the title track on their album, All You Good People, starts with a very similar soundscape. Certainly on the drums. I might put both in next to each other so you can hear it.
Please don't.
You can't stop me. And now, Curtis. Anyway, so it's a dramatic sort of intro to the song, and then you get a beautiful little melody piece, which reminded me a little bit of the song "Summertime."
Yeah.
And then you get that gorgeous Curtis voice coming in. And as the title would suggest, the other side of town is all about growing up in a poor neighborhood, and food's hard to come by, and kids wearing hand-me-down clothes that are wearing out, and all this sort of stuff. So it's really it is that real sort of social commentary. But the song, and I love this combination: subject matter heavy, music gorgeous, and that is what happens in this. You get, do I detect a bit of harpsichord in here as well? I like a harpsichord.
Quite possibly.
Oh,
I love the horn accents all the way through that. I just think it is a really moving song. It's without ever being, sort of a little bit syrupy or sentimental. It never crosses that line at all. This isn't a song from a musical.
I never learned to share or how to care. I never had no teachings about being fair. Depression is part of my mind. The sun never shines on the other side of town.
Yeah, he's good at treating not always common themes, but themes that you might expect to find in music, and treating them in a very grown-up way, I think, and in a way that you may not fully expect. There's one later on that we're going to talk about. I'll just mention it now in passing, but Give It Up, the final track on the album, which is a kind of a breakup song, but I think probably the most grown-up breakup song I've ever heard.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about Give It Up, because I think this whole album is intended to feel very positive. It's supposed to be a very, very positive message. Society can be better. Things may not be great, but we can improve. It's all about, we can all improve as a group.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, I'm talking to my own community.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm talking to everybody else as well.
Yeah.
We can all just be better human beings.
Mm.
And it's all incredibly positive until you get to Give It Up at the closer, which is a truly negative song, produced beautifully. It's there, but it's almost like he's just looked deep within himself and gone, my marriage is up, and it's the disappointment. It's like having tried to be positive all the way through, so I think, Miss Black America is an incredibly positive. It's tried to be an enabling, uplifting song, wild and free, certainly.
Definitely positive.
And then you get to Give It Up. And Give It Up is, for an album that's supposed to be all about hope, that feels, although it's about an individual, it feels incredibly hopeless.
I mean, so the way I consumed Give It Up was, it feels like the end, and it's the final track on the album. It feels like, I don't know if he ever closed his live shows with that, but it would be a great song to finish, like the curtain's almost coming down. It's almost like his version of My Way, I think. But the subject matter, as you say, it's about the breakup of a marriage or a relationship that isn't working. It's broken down. There's definitely a pang of sadness, but I don't think there's regret. As I say, it's a really sort of grown up. It's almost a bit defiant, but it's not vindictive towards the other person.
No,
There's no malice in
but
it.
it's a sort of single note of negativity for me.
But I'm not sure it's that negative. It's like, look, we're two grown ups. We've had a great time together. We've been married. We love each other. We've got kids, but it's not working, you know. And I love some lyrics in this. All concerning the trusts that never happened with us, and it just little things like, and I never had too much concern or interest in astrology.
Yeah,
You know, which is, but there's no, with most breakup songs, there's bitterness to it. There's no bitterness in this. It's just an acceptance that it's come to an end.
It's a strange outlier for me in the album.
But because they treat it he treats it in such a grown up way. This has just happened. It doesn't mean I care for you any less. It just means we're not together anymore. I find that quite a positive thing, actually.
Yeah.
I really truly love you, and the kids, you must agree. And I never had too much concern or interest in astrology. But as I read, it must be so, the invulnerable word incompatible. No matter how much we try, our indifference would still show. Now we've got to give it up.
You know, there's no threats, there's no recriminations, there's no you've made me worse or anything like that. It's just, that's funny, isn't it? That you see it as wholly negative, whereas I see it.
Well, I don't see it as wholly. I think, you know, as you said, there are many, many songs that are considerably more angst-ridden that are dealing with this subject matter. It's a strange and very, very sort of personal end to an album that's actually dealt with really quite broad themes.
Yes.
And so I sort of go, it just seems an odd, musically, it fits perfectly.
Yeah.
But thematically, it sort of comes a little sideways for me. But there we go.
Let's go back to Miss Black America, which you mentioned a few moments ago, which is a beautiful track. Actually, the thing I like most about this song musically is kind of the harmonies within it, the vocal harmonies, which really remind me of classic soul music, classic Motown, I suppose. It almost harks back to
it's like the Impressions, actually. It's
right.
got a little bit of that, yeah.
And we'd like to say, God bless Miss Black America. Watch over Miss Black America. She cried tears of success. We wish her long happiness. Miss Black America.
So it's got those harmonies. It's got Bacharach style brass within it as well. And actually, I did a bit of reading around this Miss Black America, the actual beauty pageant, which I think it started in about 1968, and it started almost in protest to Miss America because African American women weren't allowed to participate in it, which seems ridiculous. And indeed, in 1977, apparently, much later than we're looking at the moment, but apparently in 77, NBC broadcast Miss Black America the day before CBS was showing Miss America, which I thought was quite good. And this was Miss Black America was something that the lots of kind of black artists, Stevie Wonder had championed it, Curtis was championing it. The black community was very, very proud of this. And also, I like the intro to it where the little girl says, "Hello, Daddy," and he says, "Hello, my little love child." Which I mean, he had about 10 kids in his life, didn't he? I'm not sure how many he had at the time. But anyway, I just found that was a kind of a fascinating commentary and a beautiful song, beautiful harmonies.
It's a beautiful song. It is indicative of this sort of segregation that is still existing, which is interesting when we then think about Superfly and that genre of film, which is made again because that community would like to see their own heroes on screen. And you know, and again, I back up your point. You know, we're not social commentators, we're not historians, and we're not people who've ever been in the situations that are kind of discussed in this album. And if any of what we say seems to jar, I do heartily apologize. But you can't not deal with the subject matter of what we have here. And I just think one of the reasons this is so interesting is that Curtis Mayfield has such a sense of hope and expectation that everybody, and I mean everybody, can be better, can raise themselves. That's the theme of Move On Up, is all about raising yourself. And it doesn't have to be this way, as the Blow Monkeys would later come on and sing.
Yeah.
And I just find that, as you said, we're two white guys in our 50s. I find it hopeful and enabling and encouraging, as I would hope the people who heard it in 1970 did. But although they were dealing with different and stark issues. And if you want to know a little bit more about the background to that time, I would point you to the Rest is History podcast, which has a very good series about America in 1968.
You don't have to point people towards that podcast. They've got millions of listeners. That maybe they can point people towards us.
Well, hopefully, having done it, we can have a little.
Yeah, come on. It's only fair.
It's only reciprocal. Dominic Sandbrook, are you listening?
But yeah, side 2, as I mentioned before, is, I think you're right. I think the whole album has a great deal of optimism and positivity about it. But I do think it's fair to say that side 1 is much heavier, and side 2 is much kind of lighter and more upbeat. So, you finish side 1 with We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue. You flip it over and you're into Move On Up. Bang, you're in a different place. Then you have Miss Black America, which is a sweet song. Then you've got Wild and Free, which is probably the most positive song on the whole album. That burst of bright brass in the intro, more lovely harp.
Wild and free is the way I wanna be. Making a new day.
Kind of, it's great being young and having fun, isn't it? And then you finish with Give It Up, which I find fairly positive, but I understand that not everyone sees it that way. But side 2 definitely much kind of brighter and cheerier than side 1. Fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I do, as I say, I go back to the overall theme is we can raise ourselves, we can be better. I just think, I think you're probably right. I think it's a bit sweeter.
Yeah.
Side 2. It's just even the arrangements feel a bit sweeter than on side 1, which just fit, with the exception of Move On Up, which obviously is pretty darn funky.
Another area that I was interested. I mean, you've mentioned the covers done by Weller for both the Jam and Style Council. I think it was the Jam one I listened to, and I was struck by the bass was very, very prominent in the Jam version, which I really enjoyed. I'm not the biggest of Jam fans, as you may know. I think they're another of my slight blind spots, but I do like that cover, and Weller obviously likes the song a lot.
Bruce Foxton is a very, very good bassist.
Yeah, well, as I say, it's something that really struck me listening to that cover version. Maybe I'll drop that clip in so listeners can judge for themselves. But also, I like to think about with albums like this, is like how much they've been sampled as well. Is often a one measure of how much respect they're recorded by artists that come a generation or two later on. And it seems that Kanye West is a massive Curtis fan. So he has sampled this album alone, Touch the Sky, which is one of his more famous songs, I think, from 2005. Takes Move On Up.
I gotta testify, come up in the spot looking extra fly. For the day I die, I'ma touch the sky. Gotta testify, Come up in the spot looking extra fly. For the day I die, I'ma touch the sky. Back when they thought pink polos would hurt the rock before Cam got the...
There's another track of his from the year before called Jesus Walks, where he samples Don't Worry. And there's a track he does with Jay-Z called The Joy 2011, where he samples Makings of You. So, and there may be more. I'm sure there are. There's just a few there. Kanye, obviously a big fan of Curtis. I'll drop one or two of those in so people can listen as well. There's also a cover version of We the People by a band called Babe Ruth. Not a band I've ever come across. Don't know if you've heard of them, Tone. It's got a great guitar solo, but again, something people want to go and look it up, or I'll drop a little clip in as well.
Those people who were darker than blue, are they gonna hang around this town and let what others
But yeah,
say?
clearly influential in musical circles, sampled a lot, covered a lot, and held in pretty high esteem, I think, by artists that came further down the track.
I think possibly sampled quite a lot because actually it wasn't quite as well known as it perhaps has become. And in the time, I mean, Kanye West liking this album, please don't take that as a recommendation that that's what you should, that's it. Hopefully ours is recommendation enough. And quite interesting and ironic that Kanye West should take a sort of deliberately non-confrontational album as the source for so much of his work, because I'm not sure I think they often have quite different intentions as artists, certainly as people.
Yeah. Anything else to say before we taper towards the end, or should we?
No.
Do you want to talk about some further listening?
No, let's. I mean, I hope you all will go and give this album a listen. I think
please do.
It's a wonderful way to spend 40 minutes of further listening. Obviously, please do listen to Superfly. He's still feeling very positive at that stage. Bear in mind what I'd said earlier about, interestingly, it comes out long before the film did. And deliberately, that was Curtis Mayfield's request. I think it's also interesting that that's the one that the critics tend to favor. I wonder if it's because it's a soundtrack that people feel less uncomfortable with it. It's sort of, without knowing the background of, you kind of do it and you think of it like Shaft and the others in it, but it's not that kind of album.
That is an interesting point, actually, whether it's easier to consume because we're more used to films dealing with difficult subject matter than we are with music or albums. And therefore, an album that's attached to a film, you go, oh, it's fine because it's part of that Shaft film or it's part of that whatever. You go, oh, yeah, that makes sense then. Whereas an album that just exists without that is maybe more challenging.
And many, music critics, are kind of guys like us, and they probably feel more comfortable consuming the soundtrack than something like this, which is there to make you feel, to sit and think about things. So I would definitely recommend that you go to Superfly. If you can, there are some very good compilations of the Impressions, which I would definitely recommend if you have any kind of love of soul. I have one here, which I hold up to the camera there, Curtis Mayfield, featuring the Impressions.
Okay.
Which is a lovely, that's got everything on it. We're a winner. A woman's got soul, keep on pushing, people get ready. They're all on there, and that's definitely worth checking out. But I would, if you've never heard Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, you really should listen to it. Inner City Blues is a wonderful record. I would listen to Sly and the Family Stone with There's a Riot Going On and Stand. they had very much sort of tried to because they were a multiracial band.
Yeah.
And they had always tried to be more positive, but their mood changes as the history and the political circumstances around changes, and they become more hard-edged in how they write. And if you are feeling very brave, you should definitely give some Gil Scott-Heron a go. Pieces of Man, or The Revolution will not be televised.
You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John.
They have songs like that are very dangerous, like Whitey on the Moon, which is but it's much more strident. So I would definitely, there's a lot of great further listening. This is a genre that I know, I listen to more than you do, Paul. But
undoubtedly,
this is a terrific place to start your discovery if you don't really listen to much in this ballywick.
Well, I'm so glad that you did introduce me to it, because I mean, in common with that's the idea of this whole pursuit, isn't it? That you say, right, here's something that you might like, and I go, oh yeah, I'm sort of dimly aware of them, or I've heard that one track or whatever. So I had heard 1 or 2 tracks. Superfly is another track I love, by the way, whenever I hear it on the radio. So I was more than happy, but I perhaps didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I have. I mean, I was just to go back to the sheer musicianship, the arrangements, his incredible voice, the production, the soundscape from start to finish on this album is just joyful musically. So I loved it. In fact, since we're talking in those terms about, I'm going to give you my mark right now before we move on to everything else.
Do it.
Scores pretty well. 75% this is going to get. 75.
So still doesn't beat the Kinks.
The Kinks are still there at number 1. I love that album.
Lord.
But 75% for Curtis. That's
it's an A.
It's a first. It's easier first. Yeah.
I think I might go slightly higher on it if I was scoring, but I'm very pleased that you enjoyed it, because it's
absolutely
a wonderful record.
Absolutely loved it. And before we pop off, let's just return to the Twilight tidbit, which, just to remind everyone, is debut albums named after the artist's first name. So Curtis Mayfield had Curtis, that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so. Tone, do you have any?
Well, there I was thinking, I've cracked this. It's fine. Because, and then I realized that you wanted debut albums.
I did underline the word debut, didn't I?
You did underline the word debut. So I cannot give you Whitney by Whitney Houston.
No, you may not.
No, because her first album was called Whitney Houston. Her second album was called Whitney.
Yeah.
Which makes you think that her third album might have been called Whit. Yeah, but no, it wasn't. But that doesn't count. So this is actually quite tough. I will give you Madonna by Madonna.
Ooh, that's good. Very good.
It's a bit. I realize I'm slightly cheating because she only had one name as an artist, but it was her first name, Madonna Ciccone.
There you go. No,
that counts.
That definitely counts. Right, I'm going to give you a couple now. Here's a game.
Here we go.
I'll give you the title of the album. You have to guess who the artist is. Right. This one from 1978, Chaka
Khan.
From 1988, Kylie. From 19
is it Bob Dylan?
From 1991, Alanis.
Was that her debut?
Yeah. Is that Chakademus and Pliers? And going back a bit, from 1976, who could this be? Peebo. Oh dear. I enjoyed researching that.
I'll bet you did. Yeah, well, you've done very well on that. As I say, I can only give you Madonna.
If only you could.
If only I could.
Right then, Tone, perhaps you could tell us what is going to be my homework for next time round.
Well, again, something very different. As you know, we like to change it up every week.
Yep.
So the next episode, we're going to have a lovely discussion about the Mail Brothers, Sparks,
Ooh.
and their 1994 album, Gratuitous Sax and Senseless Violins.
Now
So
that's
why
a
not?
title.
Yes. In fact, I chose it on the basis I thought you'd like the title and
I-
you'll like some of the song names on it. Please try listening to that before you join us and join in our discussion.
I think that'll probably do us, Tone.
It's been lovely doing this with you, Paul, as ever. Please do follow us on Facebook. Do like, subscribe, recommend to your friends. But we really appreciate all your support so far. And thank you, Paul. Take care. God bless.
And see you next time. It's been an absolute joy. We'll see you next time at the Twilight Turntable.
We'll be trying to change the world one late night long player at a time. Please try listening.